Step into the ring.
Hello.
Hey, how's it?
It's going good. How are you?
Doing okay, sorry. Yeah, I guess before we get started, do you have anything you'd like to talk about or any questions you may have, or would you prefer to get some games in and go from there?
Yeah, like I just a couple like things. It's
Okay.
so like I'm like your average Joe Schmo 2-and-2er. Sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less. I don't really lose to people who are like generally worse than me, but I can never seem to just close it out with people that are better than me. I have a bad habit, especially recently, of when I'm playing someone who is better than me. I'll be up 3 stocks, like I'll be winning, and then I just can't close it out. Sometimes I don't know if it's because I'm not able to make those changes or because I'm just flubbing.
Yeah.
So it gets like a little frustrating. Like I try not to let it bug me, but and I've only recently, like within the last year, started going to locals a lot.
Okay.
But like one of my good friends now plays the exact same characters that I do at a higher level. He was at the New Jersey thing. I went with him to the invitational thing. He's from Central PA.
Oh, okay. Tri-State Showdown?
Yeah. I was the guy who asked
Okay.
about the Luca trade.
Okay.
But it's so everyone kind of knows those things about the characters, and so I feel like I'm working. They have to reinvent the wheel every time I play against someone because they know my toolkit and how to play around it better than I know how to use it.
Okay.
All those matchups.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff we could talk about, especially regarding like the concept of, you're talking about being up 3 stocks and like not being able to close it out and things like that. I think there's a lot of very general things we can talk about to help with that. And we can also maybe try to look into the perspective and maybe even reframing the perspective of the difficulties when you're playing up against someone that is like more aware of your characters. I guess first things first, I guess we could start a game just so the arena doesn't close, but we can like visualize a couple things.
I like your profile picture. Your voice is so good.
Oh, thank you, I appreciate it.
It's-
Yeah, I have a tattoo of the symbol as well.
Oh, you do? That's awesome.
So I guess first things first, especially this is something I talk about a lot in these Metafy lessons. You mentioning like having a lead and whatnot. I'm always talking about different perspectives and how to be efficient when you're trying to bring a game back from a deficit or trying to hold a lead. The most important thing I like to throw out there is that it's essentially 2 sides of the same coin. Like bringing a game back from a deficit and holding a lead require like pretty much the same skill sets. And a lot of people in this game, they usually lose or win the game based off like the first stock being lost. Like even if it doesn't seem like that. Because let's say I lose the first stock, it's 5.5 minutes left. So 1.5 minutes have passed, I lost the first stock. Usually players there will be like, okay, I'm losing, I have to approach. Which is true, but they don't like layer it more than that. Because for me, I know I'm at a deficit and I have to approach, but there's 5.5 minutes left. So I'm probably going to treat it like it's even. And I'm kind of going to use the clock as a way of gauging my risk reward, and also it kind of tells you everything that happened previously and what you need to do going forward. It's not necessarily about like camping or timing someone out, but it gives you every bit of information you need to know. And it's the same thing when you're winning too. A lot of players, when they're winning, they can really struggle if their ability to hold the lead is put to the test. And the problem is, a lot of the time, the person at a deficit doesn't, give themselves that chance of pressuring their opponent's ability to hold a lead, and they'll just start approaching them without realizing if they didn't approach, the person winning might, give them more opportunities than they might have expected. So that's the first thing I'd like to mention, is really, really using the clock and really asking yourself a couple questions throughout all of the stock losses between you and your opponent, and maybe any situations where you have some breathing room, and really helping gauge your risk reward for the rest of the match going forward. Because then if we use another example, like let's say I have 1 stock and they have 2 stocks, and there's like a minute 45 left. That's a lot different than the first example, and I might have to start weaving some Hail Mary plays or some riskier plays into my gameplay to help try to bring the game back. But using the clock can kind of help you really justify certain actions and certain commitments, and also help yourself, whether it's with holding a lead or bringing a game back from a deficit. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, I definitely, like, I'm always more comfortable. Ooh, my controller's connected. I'm more comfortable in a liquid position because I know that Joker and Carlos can just, blow you up sometimes, right? Like, that's...
Yeah.
And I feel like I just kind of lose sight of that when I'm winning. And so I and so I don't... So I definitely should pay more attention to, like, when I'm in a position. Not get as desperate.
Yeah, there's a lot of lessons I'll do where I'll mention this, and players might mention like, oh, I don't usually look at the clock much at all, and then it gets me thinking like, oh, maybe I use it because I have a lot of experience with Wario, like for most years of my life playing this game. But I think it's something that's worth it regardless for any character, whether it's something you have to actually use for your character's toolkit or not. Just because it really gives you a lot of information, and it's something that's a consistent thing in Smash. And I think one of the difficulties about Ultimate is there's a lot of inconsistencies. But things like the ledge and the corner and respawning and the clock, like those are things you can always work with every game and every matchup on every stage. So it's one of the most important things I'm always talking about in these lessons, is the universal things in Smash and how you can make the most of them, to the point where some of the things that may catch you off guard, or some of the inconsistency of Ultimate, can kind of be mitigated just from some of these perspectives. And that's usually my main strategy, whether it's something I'm teaching or whether I'm playing the game myself. But yeah, I'm glad you mentioned, like, it's a little bit easier for you when you're at a deficit, but it's a little bit harder when you're on the lead. Like, a couple examples is, like, let's say something I do to test my opponent all the time, like if it's someone I've never really played against, or just I want to test my opponent's current mental state, is like a lot of the time when people are cornered, they try to get out of the corner as fast as possible, like with burst options, whether it's dash attacks or rolls or whatever character specific it may be. So they don't want to be there. They want to get out of there as quickly as possible, and they also use like the quickest numbers possible to do that. So a lot of the time when I'm in the corner, I try to pressure my opponent as much as possible, because you'd be surprised how many people will enter this corner while I'm just waiting for them. And then I can either completely reverse the situation, like now they're being cornered, or maybe I can even get a hit that could result in a kill that otherwise wouldn't. So one of the most important things about the corner is that the person in advantage has to realize, even if this person's waiting forever, that you're an advantage and they have to make something happen. They have to make the first move just because you have so much more stage than them. And a lot of players in those moments, they get uncomfortable with like the silence, I guess is how I would word it. And a lot of players get uncomfortable with that dead air and think they have to do something. And I think it's really important to make sure that it's really important to be comfortable with nothing. Because a lot of players will put that pressure on you just to see if you crumble and think that you have to make something happen just because nothing is currently happening. And it kind of matches a little bit with the concept of bringing a game back from a deficit and holding a lead, is making sure you understand where your advantages lie. So if you're controlling the stage in your opponent's corner, even if they wait forever, like I usually recommend against entering a corner that isn't yours, is how I would word it.
Kind of like a boxing.
Sorry, what's up?
Like boxing, like just...
Exactly. It's an advantage that you have, and I think it differs maybe sometimes if you have a bit more like momentum and you have a big advantage. Like maybe then it's different when you're trying to get something started. But if it's a pretty generic situation and you're like right here and your opponent's right here, it's really important that you don't sacrifice your own advantage. And also, your opponent being cornered is a situation that's going to repeat itself. It's going to happen again just because it's such a core aspect of the game. So not only are you holding your advantage, you're also collecting information for the next time they're cornered. You might have more information for when they like to get out of the corner, for what they use to get out of the corner. And if you're too busy entering the corner yourself, not only are you risking sacrificing your stock or your advantage, you're also not going to collect any information for the next time that situation presents itself. So it's very similar to just the general concept of holding a lead or bringing a game back from a deficit, is understanding which situations are universal and when it's more important to observe rather than to, you know, sometimes it's important to observe rather than even hitting your opponent, you know what I mean? You can kind of argue for that just because the situations often repeat themselves.
I'm a bit of like a crayon and glue muncher, so like sometimes I get uncomfortable with nothing happening, so I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, I feel like it's very key, and it's something that a lot of people will put pressure on their opponents with just to see. It's basically a check to see if they can make their own lives easier. Like, if I'm in the corner and I know I have to make the first move and I'm in disadvantage, but if my opponent gives me something to react to, now in a situation where I should be swinging first, I'm swinging second. So my opponent's basically doing all the work for me, and this applies to things like the ledge as well. Like if I'm being patient on the ledge and just waiting, and my opponent does like a forward tilt or something because they're trying to preemptively cover space and cover ledge options, now I'm in a situation where I should have to just simply pick an option and hope it works and try to, like, you know, gauge the risk reward that way. Now I simply have to respond to the visual cue my opponent's giving me, and I just have to pick the right option. So I'm given that privilege in a situation where I don't, you know, deserve it. And it's something that applies to every aspect of it. A lot of the time it stems from these universal situations. Because kind of similar to the corner, when someone's ledge trapping, they usually try to cover as much as possible. Just covering as much as possible. Like for example, if I'm Diddy Kong, like a common strategy would be, you know, throwing out down tilts to pressure the ledge hang, throwing out aerials to cover the jump. And at that point, you know, if I do something like this, during that second down tilt, my opponent just has to simply pick the quote-unquote right option. And there might even be multiple. In a situation where they shouldn't be having that privilege because they're in disadvantage. But if I do something like this, that's completely different. Now, their best thing to respond to is the first down tilt. And I'm already covering the first down tilt with something more micro. So now, not only am I ledge trapping without sacrificing myself, I'm also preparing for the corner pressure scenario afterward. So if I don't successfully ledge trap them, I still have the frame advantage to back up and go into what we were just talking about previously. So it's really important to find that balance between holding your advantage and collecting information, because once again, all these situations will repeat themselves, whether it's that game or it's the next, you know what I mean? Because, you know, in a tournament set, we only have 3 to 5 games to work with. So collecting information and getting that ball rolling as quickly as possible and as efficiently as possible is really important to try to get an advantage over the person behind the controller. And a lot of players don't even give themselves a chance to collect information because they're too busy being a bit too preemptive in whatever scenario it might be. Hopefully that makes some sense.
That makes a lot of sense, yeah. It's me, I'm yeah.
Because I think a lot of the time when people don't successfully ledge trap, they think in the sense of, okay, I just executed wrong. Next time they're in that scenario, they do the same thing again and they hope they just time it slightly better. So it's kind of like they're running into a brick wall and they're not like adjusting. Like for example, if I'm fighting a Game & Watch player and I'm trying to ledge trap and I get like, you know, I get reversaled by like a neutral air, instead of like next time being like, oh, I just messed up, like let me keep my advantage next, I'll probably back up, be a bit more observant for options and timings, and you know, I'm putting less pressure on, but I'm still prepared for the corner pressure scenario and I'm still holding stage control. So sometimes it's about finding that balance, and it's really about assessing like what momentum you have and like what you currently prefer in that moment. Because there might be a situation that might be the exact opposite, where I would prefer to ledge trap rather than the corner pressure. But it all depends on the information I've collected throughout those matches. But yeah, especially if, kind of similar to what we were talking about trying to have a perspective that helps mitigate being caught off guard and dealing with things we're not aware of. Because one of the most common complaints about this game is you know, how am I supposed to be prepared for all the matchups? There's so many matchups and stages and situations. And rather than viewing it like, oh, just being prepared for everything and studying for everything, it's more so about grouping character archetypes, grouping scenarios into similar ones, and playing in a way that where you can be prepared to be caught off guard and kind of giving yourself insurance. So it's kind of a completely different perspective, because for me, I'm not playing every matchup individually, like all 80 plus of them. I'm trying to group it together as much as possible and just having a very developed flowchart for my own character, and I can adjust it on the fly as quickly as possible. So I'm not really viewing it the way like a lot of people come into these lessons saying like, I lost to this character last week because I've never played against it, blah blah blah, and it's like, I'm trying to create a flowchart for myself and for other people where you can win those sets the first time rather than having to try to win it the second or third time, just for efficiency's sake. And it's just a common thing in these matches or in these Metaphy lessons is talking about things like that.
Because that's like honestly, including something is too much for me individually. So.
Exactly, like you can group things together a bit. And it doesn't even have to be characters, it could be playstyles and people and personalities, and it can go a lot deeper, and it can really help because once again, like, you know, you only have 3 to 5 games to work with, so if you can get that like information collection rolling as quickly as possible, it can lead to consistency, but it can also lead to confidence, because there's a lot of scenarios in Smash that have like inherent risk, and that's okay, but I think if you go into it with feeling like it's an educated risk, it can really, really help with justifying a lot of certain decisions. Whereas otherwise, you know, with a different frame of mind, it might be chalked up to like, it either works or it doesn't. But if you go for like, you know, a ledge jump read and you're saying, okay, this is based off the fact that they jumped out of disadvantage earlier or they were jumping out of shield, and you're kind of giving yourself an educated guess, because, you know, we're not mind readers or anything, but, you know, you can connect certain decisions into other ones if you're very observant, and it can kind of help just, you know, justify pulling the trigger, because I think that's another thing a lot of players have a hard time with is they see an opportunity, but they're not always taking it just because they're scared of the inherent risk. And I think you can kind of help manage those risks and also help manage feeling confident when you do go for them with some of these perspectives. Sorry if I rambled a bit.
No, that makes sense. Like, that makes sense, because like, I've thought about that before, but never like at length, and okay, that makes sense.
Allow me to demonstrate.
It helps you balance it. Not just doing like a random burst thing that is... It makes sense. I don't know how to articulate that, but...
Yeah,
big green check mark, I understand.
I guess the next important thing to get into is what you said about how to play out scenarios against players that seem very comfortable against yours. And there's a few things to talk about here. So, one is like every character kind of has like built-in win conditions, whether it's very apparent or not. Like, you know, if we look at like Donkey Kong grab or Wario waft, those are things that both players are aware of from the beginning, before the game even starts, right? So the person playing against those win conditions is going to be playing around it. So the best thing about these win conditions isn't landing. It's about how much information you collect before it even presents itself. Same thing with Banana. If we were playing right now, as soon as this scenario presents itself, you have to do something before I even toss it. So something that's more important about Banana rather than landing it is just how much information you collect from having it in your hand. So when I'm teaching the game, like especially Diddy Kong players, I'm trying to teach the idea of how important it is to hold on to the banana rather than throw it. And every character has some sort of idea like this. Is, you know, whether your opponent's aware of it or not, like in this example they are. Like for example, if I'm playing Byleth and I'm aware that they don't want to get shield broken, right? It's something that usually happens if your opponent's not very comfortable in the matchup or just unaware. So you want to see what they're preemptively doing around these certain tools, right? For example, maybe they're trying to, you know, manage their shield health, they're trying to jump out of shield, maybe they're controlling the platforms. and you're collecting all that information before anything meaningful even happens. Obviously, I don't play Byleth myself, so the examples aren't going to get too specific, but you can kind of see where this is going from any of your strength. Like, for example, there's going to be plenty of scenarios where your opponent's shield is less healthy than yours because you're spacing on their shield, right? With whether, let's say, it's a down tilt or a forward air or something. So that means the next time you two interact, they will have a less healthy shield than you. And a lot of players don't realize how important that is. It's kind of like a neutral tool. So, you know, I play a lot of Sephiroth myself, so that's one of the important things for me, is I'll start using my sword moves a bit more frequently if I know my opponent's shield is less healthy than mine. That means they're more likely to get poked, they're more likely to be caught escaping their shield, and they're also more likely to not be shielding in the first place. So with Byleth, and like any sword character, that's kind of the built-in strength that you're trying to take advantage. So that means you're trying to take advantage of those things before they even happen, if that makes sense. Yeah. And it's really important just to see like what they're preemptively doing and how that can bleed into other aspects of the game. Like if I use Diddy Kong, for example, like I'll ask you. So if we were playing right here, and obviously I know that you have to do something about this, what would be your generic strategy if we were playing right here and I had banana in
had it in hand? Well, I don't want to shield because like I feel like you want me to shield, so I'm not gonna commit to anything. So I might like nair towards you and see if you're gonna throw it. That way, even like next time, like how. I guess I'm just watching you to see what the hell you do.
Exactly, that's perfectly fine. So basically my goal is like, let's say you do like drift towards center stage in there. So there's two things, right? For me to collect. One, that's an attack, and two, you're drifting towards me. So I try to, whether I punish it or not, it's not about that. It's more so asking myself, how could that decision you just made connect into other aspects of the game? Maybe that means you're likely to do it out of the corner, right? Maybe that means you're gonna drift out like towards center stage out of the corner. Maybe that means when you're in disadvantage, you might want to drift towards center stage. Maybe that means you might want to jump off ledge because you did an aerial. So I'm trying to ask myself those questions before those situations even happen. So before the corner happens, before disadvantage happens, before the ledge happens, I'm already asking myself something. And it's all because of a built-in advantage that Banana has. And the even better thing, before I get Banana, because your character's slow, we both know that I'm going to be able to do this in neutral. So before I even have it, Banana is dominating neutral before it's even on the screen. So I'm trying to see, what are you going to do when I don't have it? Are you going to put pressure on letting me get it? Are you going to go into your projectile? Or are you going to jump? Are you going to let me get it? And I'm already collecting that information whether I have it or not. So that's the biggest thing with using your character's tools. And you have to ask yourself, like, what are they preemptively doing around my character? And it can really help when, you know, those universal situations start to present themselves. And it can really help kind of reframe the idea that someone knowing what your character does is a weakness for you. And you can kind of reframe it and view it as a strength for yourself. Because you can argue sometimes someone knowing what your character does might even be better than if they don't. Because it gets a little bit easier to collect information and to justify things in like a logical way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Rather than if they don't know what they're up against and it becomes a little bit harder to track. Obviously, if they don't know what they're up against, you're probably just gonna to win anyways. But I guess you can get what I'm coming from. So a lot of the time, the goal is to just kind of reframe that mindset and try to use it as a strength for yourself, and just view it as collecting information a little bit more freely, rather than having to reinvent the wheel.
That makes sense, actually. I haven't heard it put that way before, but that makes it a lot better to like that, because they already know what to be afraid of, so they're going to be playing around with that preemptively. So I just have like that. Okay, that makes sense.
You can try to find their tendencies a bit more preemptively, because if you frame it as trying to reinvent the wheel, right? In my head, that kind of sounds like you would be swinging first, you would be putting pressure on, you would, you know what I mean? Like you might be taking the initiative more often, which means now they get to collect information more often. Just because they're more aware that, you know, I don't know, that's just how it's phrased to me, like when it comes to that. And if you reframe it, I think it becomes a little bit easier to find the balance a bit better. And yeah, it's just a common thing with sword characters in general. Rather than thinking you have to take matters into your own hands and scrap a bit more, you can more so view it as collecting information yourself and focus on pre-positioning to a range that's more comfortable for your character. Like for example, let's say we were like right here, and let's say I'm Sephiroth actually. So a lot of the times in situations like this, if I'm Sephiroth, I'm gonna do something like this, right? I'm gonna do a falling back here because I'm repositioning for the next interaction and like trying to outspace, right? Especially if you're like a generic character like Mario or something. And then I go right into shield. The problem with that scenario is during the startup of my aerial, my opponent could just inch forward and shield, and now we're right back in the same situation, right? So a lot of the time with these sword characters, the most important thing, especially when you want to consistently collect information and make sure you're not getting overwhelmed, is making sure you're pre-positioning rather than repositioning. Because this is a reposition, but doing something like drop shield slingshot is pre-position. You're getting the same advantage across, but you're shaving frames off so you're ready for the next interaction. Because if your opponent approaches in that downtime, you have a lot more frames to work with. It's kind of similar with Byleth. It would be deciding between neutral air and disengaging. And with neutral air, it's like a do or die scenario, right? It either works or it doesn't.
Yeah.
And with disengaging, you have more freedom of your own character and you have access to more of your character. So obviously it depends on the situation and like how much advantage you have and what you consider to be a good option to go for. But it's something I think is really important with sword characters, that a lot of the time they are fighting in place to outrange their opponent rather than being on the move, which means they're constantly repositioning and they're never quite comfortable, rather than pre-positioning and being like 2 or 3 situations ahead to where they can really make the use out of their character. And it's something I talk a lot about with Sephiroth in these lessons, because since his moves are so committal, they'll find themselves like scrapping a lot more than they would like to, just because they're using those sword moves like from the get-go, rather than trying to stay 2 or 3 spots ahead, establishing a small advantage, and then using sword move. And you can kind of preach that perspective with any sword character, but with Sephiroth it's just a bit more extreme. But with Byleth, you know, certain things can still apply, of course. I think, you know, if we think of someone like Leo, you can start to make more sense of like his decisions with things like down tilt and like being patient in the corner and slingshotting. It's like once you put some of these things into perspective, it becomes a bit easier to justify why slingshot is good in the first place.
Yeah, not accuracy. I feel like I try to utilize down tilt as like a move specifically, but I don't get it as often, and it's definitely because I'm not pre-positioned to some degree.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I'm gonna select Byleth. Like, I'm bear with me, I'm not good with the character or anything, but I'm gonna like showcase a scenario, and hopefully it like puts into perspective like a general thing you could do all the time with the character. So a lot of sequences will probably start like this.
3, 2,
So if you come down here and shield, a lot of scenarios will start like this, and then they'll go into something like this, right?
Yeah.
Obviously not everything is the same, but it's one of those situations where you put pressure on and then it's like a do or die. It's usually not that extreme, but someone's usually getting hit after that scenario.
Yeah.
And I think in Ultimate, I'm trying to mitigate that as much as possible for consistency, because a lot of Ultimate's mechanics kind of bait people into being very scrappy in like one note, like shield, like aerial shield, and then it just becomes a numbers game. Whoever's character has the better numbers will just win. And I'm trying to prevent that as much as possible, once again, for collecting information more consistently, and also just prioritize your own stock. But rather than that, that's where something like this comes in. So you do the forward air, it hits the shield, and you slingshot, right? So not only did you establish advantage on the shield, now it becomes a scenario where you're a character length or 2 away from them, and the pressure's on them now. If they go into the next interaction with no shield, that's where things like this come in, right? So you're already preemptively positioning for that scenario, And if they don't do it, then that's fine. Now they're disengaging, and you're at a range that's obviously fine. So that's like a general example of like trying to stay a few interactions ahead rather than using that pressure you just got and trying to go into a scrap that becomes a bit more like one note. Like something like this becomes a lot better, even if it's like double aerial or, you know, landing into shield and trying to see how they preemptively deal with it, or going into the down tilts. Obviously it's like a very common strategy as well, and it's similar to what I said with all the shield scenario. You just want to keep that pressure up. You kind of want to make it so it's like kind of in a looping scenario where every time they have to interact, you have a healthier shield than them. That's kind of the general goal. It just leads to a lot more nerves from your opponent and like riskier options, right? If I'm constantly harassing my opponent's shield, they're eventually just gonna roll in or like dash attack in, and that's where you get like the easy punishes that otherwise like a good player wouldn't give it to you. Hopefully that makes.
I've never really factored my health into the enemy shield health like that. Yeah, that actually I probably should have. Like, I never thought that they would the shield while I'm looking there. About that, because the shield popping guy. So
yeah, from the general perspective, it makes a lot of sense. But I think it's also really important to view it as like a key neutral resource. Because if I have this amount of shield and you have full shield, technically you're like slightly more likely to win neutral. And if you keep that situation looping, I think it leads to a lot of consistency. That's also like if I have a shield like this, that's why I'm very likely to like stay cornered, maybe even reset to ledge, and just really make my opponent work for it rather than do something like this and just start like going in with rolls and like greedy options. Like a lot of the time when you are in a situation where you have less neutral tools than your opponent, you want to have the perspective of like, what can I do to make them work as hard as possible for a hit? Because we're not currently in like a balanced neutral. You know what I mean? Like they have an advantage. And that's something it's one of the most important things I teach all the time is, especially when it comes to like corner or ledge or just general disadvantage, is a lot of players play these situations very fast. Like if you like hit me and like did a combo and I'm like landing, a lot of players try to land as quickly as possible and try to like make up for the damage they just took immediately. So it's like lots of fast fall air dodges, reversals, landing on their opponent, you know, and that can be fine. Obviously it's not always incorrect or something, but I always try to push the perspective of instead like asking yourself a couple of questions every time in those scenarios. Like, do I have to burn my double jump? Do I have to air dodge? What can I do to make my opponent work as possible for their hits? Rather than just like guessing and hoping all the time. Once again, kind of similar to what I was saying about like justifying your decision making with like more educated decisions. Same thing with like the ledge and corner, like being patient, using the most of your ledge invincibility, asking yourself like, what can I do to guarantee survival and make them work for it? You know, if Wolf is forward airing right here and I like get up into it and he gets a fair back air, like there's plenty of scenarios I could have done to make them work a little bit harder for it. You know, if Fox is pressuring my shield and I get grabbed, that's a perfect example of like minimizing risk and like taking a small loss just to make sure he doesn't get the most, and I'm also making him work harder for his opening. Because a lot of the time when you're in disadvantage, it's not about right or wrong if your opponent's playing well. It's about making them work for it. And it plays really well into the idea of trying to exhaust your opponent, and hopefully the game reaches a point where they are just playing poorly just because of how hard you're making them work. That's why I like using the clock and playing defensive. You know, it's not even about like camping or being lame. It's more so about, you know, if your opponent's just thinking more and having to work harder in a best of 3 or best of 5 scenario, you're hoping to like win the marathon rather than like winning the sprint. And that's like something I'm always trying to teach, because once again, disadvantage is disadvantage. I can't tell someone, oh, do this more, do this less. Unfortunately, it just doesn't work like that. But you can teach a lot of perspectives to try to guarantee survival and make your opponent work very, very hard for it.
I've never thought about, honestly, never thought about making the game harder for the other person that's sitting across from me. I've always thought about kind of making the game easier. So that's definitely gonna help. Cause like, well, I can just ruin their day and not like give it to them.
Yeah.
That's why the corner is so important. Like pushing your opponent's like ability to bring a game back from a deficit, or holding a lead, or corner pressure, or ledge, or not landing on them and landing on a platform instead. And a lot of the time when people are playing, they don't change the phase of disadvantage, right? It'll be like, okay, they got hit, now they're gonna get juggled once, and they're gonna play the juggle phase twice, rather than being like, okay, move from juggle phase to corner phase, move from corner phase to ledge phase. You're testing your opponent's ability to play well in all of those, universal scenarios of Smash, and it's constantly changing. But if you're giving them that like 10 to 15 extra damage every time before, you're like, okay, now I'm gonna change it. It just becomes too late too quickly. And I've done so much VOD review with people where they'll, use their double jump, drift towards center stage, get hit, and then now they have no resources and they got hit, and now they're off stage and it's like a checkmate scenario. And it's kind of like you didn't even give your opponent a chance to work hard for it. Rather than like, okay, use your double jump, land on a platform, or land in the corner. Now you're in a different phase entirely, and you're managing your shield health, and you're inching your way out of the corner slowly, and it takes longer. Your opponent works harder. They have to go through different phases of the game. You collect more information for the next time those situations, because they're surely going to happen again, etc.
That makes sense. I don't know. I've never thought about that, but that makes sense. Like that.
I think a lot of the time the pacing of the game is just very fast and overwhelming, and it gets a little bit harder because I think it's tempting to match your opponent's cadence and play like a typical quote-unquote ultimate style, like shield, aerial shield, and like play the numbers game, the guessing game. And I try my best to disconnect from it as much as possible, and I've just always believed in that style, and I think it can lead to a lot of consistency. I think it can also be just as exhausting for yourself as it is for your opponent, which is difficult. But I do think it can be worth it.
See, I've heard you like talk about like on your talks about like your version like of Smash, right? Like,
yeah.
And I guess that I never really understood what you meant, but that like makes so much more sense now.
Yeah.
Because this game, yeah, I never really realized it was just kind of aerial shield, like it kind of falls into like that loop.
Yeah, I think a lot of players naturally will match each other's pacing in some way, and it just leads to less information, and you start to have to rely on one or two different types of situations to win, and it's very stressful, I think, to go into the match knowing you have like one or two chances rather than, if you disconnect yourself from that pacing, you're also giving your opponent a chance to just simply lose to themselves if you don't match it, because you'd be surprised how many opponents might crumble if you don't fall into their pacing. Because what I like to call it is a lot of players will do double decisions. The aerial shield is obviously an example of that. But a lot of the times, if you're more observant rather than anything, your opponent will realize it. Like, it's not like they're an idiot or something. So, like, for example, if you're just watching and I do this, I'll know that I'm pressing something, and obviously pressing something is always vaguely punishable. I don't know how punishable, I don't even know if it truly is or not, but a lot of players will know that, and they'll cover themselves with something, right? Like aerial shield is like the most common example of, oh, I committed to something, it didn't work, and you're kind of afraid, and you're covering yourself with it. But the problem is a lot of people shave off even more frame. They'll cover themselves with spot dodges, or they'll cover themselves with another attack, or they'll cover themselves with something just like quick frame data. And a lot of the time, if you disconnect from that, they'll fall apart. You know what I mean? So now, if I'm playing someone and I'm fighting like let's say it's like a Captain Falcon, and they do a falling back air, it doesn't work, they notice it, and they spot dodge. Now I have so many choices. Let's say I don't have banana. Now, while they're in like double the lag with the double decisions, like usually I associate double decisions, quote unquote, with being in the same spot for more time than necessary. So during that spot dodge, I might decide to just pull banana. So now, even though Captain Falcon is fast on the ground and he can pressure banana, I'm using that time of him kind of fumbling to himself to set up. So it's not even about punishing or anything. I'm not even entering his space. I could even decide, like, maybe I want to position myself better. Maybe I'll go to this platform. So now he's in the middle, and I can, like, start coming down from above. And since I know he's the type to press multiple things in place, I'm gonna start trying to bait it out. And same thing with banana, right? Now I know it can be stressful to punish something immediately, right? Rather than thinking I have to punish this back air every time, I have a couple choices. I can position myself, I can power myself up with a banana, I can punish the spot dodge, I can run in and run out to see if I can bait a third decision. So I'm kind of dancing around my opponent without even doing anything. And it's just a common thing in Ultimate because a lot of players, like, because they're familiar with the game, they know they're doing something that's vaguely punishable and they're worried about it. And sometimes observing it rather than even hitting them for it can lead to them crumbling even faster and in a more dramatic fashion. Just because they know, oh snap, they didn't try to punish the first option, and they also didn't try to punish the third option, and they just like walked forward, and they're just panicking before anything meaningful even happened. So if you compare that to entering their space, and I'm responding to the first back air, now I can't even respond to the spot dodge, and now I'm kind of timing their frame advantage for them. Because now I'm dashing in while they're spot dodging. And now, even if I pick something right now, they have the slight edge, like numerically. And it kind of repeats itself like that. So disconnecting yourself from that, especially as a character like Byleth, is really important. Because Byleth, if you're outside of the farther range, you have like multiple decisions you can rely on. But at close range, you have one very good decision, but it is still very one note and it's one decision. Like, compared to me, if you neutral air here, you have that and that's it. Compared to Diddy Kong, who just numerically has more. So if you decide to commit to that, then it just becomes a lot easier for me to respond. But if you're disconnected from that, it becomes a more honest game, and you have a lot more to work with, and it's going to be easier for you to pick a position on the stage and to pick a spacing and pacing that you want to play at. So it's all about playing around those double decisions, and I think that's something that stemmed very early on for me when this game first came out, and I was trying to find consistency, you know what I mean? Because it was very frustrating to deal with like low lag, and shield grab is slower than other games, so it used to be something you could rely on. So it became a sense of not doing it at all and just disconnecting from it entirely and trying to build a strategy upon that.
It makes a lot of sense, and like it makes me kind of just want to sit down and just rewrite my whole mental game plan around that, because it's so smart. I never thought about it. Like the double button thing. I mean, like I guess I generally know this, but I never thought to think about it. Like,
it's just so common.
Yeah, like
the inherent problem with it isn't necessarily doing two decisions. It's doing two decisions that make you in place. Because that's where, like, if I do something like this and you do like aerial shield right here, rather than dealing with it head on, I'm gonna get above you. And now I have banana falling down, command grab on the way down, and it's a situation that wouldn't happen if it wasn't for the double decision. And I'm always trying to bully people and for falling for that, and that's why holding on to the banana is so important, because they're more likely to do those things even if they don't necessarily want to, just because of the pressure I'm putting on. And yeah, it also makes it easier to manage your shield health, right? Because you don't have to be like, oh, I want to punish their first decision and I have to shield it and do out of shield. Now you don't even have to do that at all if you kind of reframe the perspective altogether. You know, for another example I'm always using is like, let's say a Luigi spot dodges right here and I like run in and dash attack. if I was watching a tournament set and someone did that, even if the dash attack connects, I'm still going to disagree because the risk reward is very, very crazy. If this dash attack doesn't work, now I'm entering Luigi's space, which is exactly what he wants, and now I might get like 0 to death or something. So like, a lot of the time I'm trying to push the perspective of sometimes doing something else and observing and collecting information might even be better than like straight up getting a hit. And that obviously applies to like the corner and the ledge very often as well. But a lot of players think if they're not punishing something they're aware of or reading, that something is wrong. Because you hear that all the time, like, oh my god, I read that. And a lot of the time it requires some reframing, I think, because they think them reading it means they have to hit them, when it doesn't even necessarily have to be true. A lot of the time I'll be reading my opponent like 2 or 3 times in a row, but it just allows me to find consistency with stage control and like pulling banana, or getting small punishes on the second or third thing rather than always relying on the first. Because I'm not perfect and I'm not going to react perfectly every time either, so.
That makes sense. Rather than just get the one punish, you can just...
It can build into something greater. You collect information for how to ledge trap, how to corner pressure. I'll get a small punish, and then if they continue to do it, and they're really making my life easy, now I'm going to hit them with some crazy training mode setup, right? Just because they've given me so much information to work with, and they're not changing anything. Yeah. So now it's become a situation of like, okay, my opponent mentally has only gone this far with their layering, so now I know that I can do something otherwise that might be a little riskier. Like, that's kind of how I view it. I always view my matches as, like, trying to mentally chip away at my opponent until I feel like they are either too stressed or too tired or just straight up unaware. And the match kind of progresses that way where, like, I might get something small and then I get something bigger and then all of a sudden I'm getting, like, a spike and I'm reading something. And it you know, obviously it doesn't always progress too perfectly, but it's definitely possible. You know, like something like a Byleth shield break setup wouldn't be something you do at 3, 2, 1, go. Yeah. But it's much more likely to happen like in a second or third game or like a third stock, or just because the interactions have happened so many times and you've collected more information, and the shield break setup is a tempo break rather than like a layer 1 gameplay.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's deeper in your bag.
Exactly, and it gets easier to learn when to do it and to justify when to do it, I think, with some of these perspectives. And a lot of the time, you win without the thing even happening on the screen because they're playing so preemptively around it, right? Like, a lot of the time, you're getting extra damage just because they don't want to get shield broken, so...
Can we play a game and I'll try and, like...
Yeah, absolutely. If you have any questions at any point, let me know. And also something, if you have any questions even after today's lesson, feel free to shoot me a message on Discord and I'll try my best to help out, because I know we talked about a lot of stuff, so.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries.
Oh my god, I hope to never play even bracket. Christ.
Diddy Kong wins.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Ready? Three, two, one, go!
Fail not!
Man, that ledge visit. Anywhere on ledge, I'm dying.
It's like one of his most important like position to like either collect information, capitalize. Like corner and ledge, he just gets so much damage. That's why I kind of struggle against characters that like skip the ledge a lot, like Rob or Snake or something.
Just
I have to kind of come up with something new, because no one really cares about getting hit by Diddy Kong up air.
I got clear.
Diddy Kong wins!
Based off those games, is there is there anything I should think based off that I should? So I'm trying to not go in on everything, but
Yeah, I think there's one really important thing based off the couple games we played. There's a lot of situations, like let's say it was Violet down air, where you go for it, and the problem wasn't the down air itself, but it was the timing, where you didn't have enough frame advantage to get like a really, really proper ledge trap after. So it kind of becomes a moment where if the down air works, great, and if it doesn't, I get to reset a little too easily. Same thing with going for like an F smash while I'm off stage, where it's become a scenario where you don't get ledge or corner. Like you might get corner pressure, but you won't get ledge pressure. So one of those things about like the 2-frame attempts is you would rather be early than late. You know what I mean? Because if you're early, that means you're more likely to cover more ground with different like ledge trapping, corner pressure, collect more information. And so like if you're too late with things like with some of those options, especially if I have a lot of resources, then it just becomes a wasted opportunity to have advantage for a little longer. Like for example, if I was playing you and I went for like an F tilt 2-frame on your tether, which probably doesn't even work, then I'm just sacrificing too much. Like maybe I could have been pulling banana instead, I could have been ledge trapping, I could have been corner pressure. That's probably the most important thing. I do have another lesson like right now.
Okay.
So I do have to go. But if you have any questions on anything we talked about or anything like that, feel free to shoot me a message. And I hope today helped in some way.
Yeah, definitely did. I appreciate that.
All right. Thank you so much, and have a good one.
You too. Thank you.
Bye.